Good morning. Welcome to the Date Series. The JW Date Series seeks to provide primary resources about important dates in JW history. The series hopes to benefit students and apologists seeking primary sources for papers and projects. It also hopes to assist Jehovah's Witnesses who are doing research on their history. Each JW date video begins with a brief summary of the date's significance and is followed by a slide presentation with multiple quotes from primary sources. Each is footnoted for ease of access or for writing. The slide presentation itself is available for download at the site listed on the last slide. If you would like other primary resources, please suggest topics in the section below. Thank you, and I hope you find this helpful. Welcome to the date series. The year we're looking at is 1919. This is a particularly interesting year. As you will recall, 1918 was a year during which an inspection was supposed to be being held in order to purify the church. However, in 1919, the earliest writings, time-wise, in 1919, reflect the imminent return of Jesus or of Armageddon coming. So if you were to read the Watchtowers and the literature produced in 1919, what you would have sensed is that there was an air of imminency about that time period, about the soon coming of Jesus and the rapture of the church, if you will, or the end of time wrapping up. Later in history, moving away from the writings of 1919, the idea seems to switch just a little bit, and what you find being expressed in the writings about 1919 are that it was a time of tribulation for the Jehovah's Witnesses. There had been the jailing of their leaders, and there was persecution in various countries. So this was a time that they were being persecuted and that they were providing faithful preaching of the Word of God. So the initial when it was happening writings of 1919 were simply the end is coming, Armageddon is around the corner. The writings about 1919 for the 19s, 20s, 30s, 40s were that there was persecution that had been going on and that there was faithfulness in preaching. But interestingly, from the period 1950, 1960 onward, there appears to be the development of the idea that in the year 1919, following the inspection, it was determined that the Jehovah's Witnesses were the only group on earth that had shown themselves to be worthy of being appointed as God's sole representative on earth. So 1919 marks the year that Jehovah adopted the Jehovah's Witnesses and made them his mouthpiece on earth. It's an interesting development because it appears to be the development of mythology. If Jehovah had made the Watchtower organization his agency on earth in 1919, one would have assumed that it would have been noticed somehow. There would have been an article somewhere, there would have been maybe a picture. I don't know, but you understand what I'm saying. At the time, there was no reference to this, and it took 40 years before this finally was developed. So it's an interesting development of doctrine, and it is an important development to look at because of this idea that they are God's sole mouthpiece, it is now possible for them to make significant claims, and we'll look at that in one of the shorter slide series, how this 1919 appointment affects the way that they preach and teach about their own organization. It's quite fascinating. Welcome to JW Dates. The year would be 1919. As always, the last slide in the series will lead or will have a link to Google where you can download all the slides to make them more useful for your studies or your projects. 1919 is going to be interesting. It can be broken up into three sections. The first section, early on in the time frame, there was concern for the soon coming Armageddon, for the return of Jesus. Then in the second time frame, there is some explanation of how faithful the JWs have been in preaching and teaching. And then finally, in the last and the latest section in time, there are references to the appointment of the Watchtower organization as God's sole organization and his only mouthpiece. And those are much later dates. Just watch the dates as you go through. So 1919, in regard to the end, April 1st, 1919, it talks about people being concerned that this particular get-together might be the last one because God is coming so soon. January 15th, 1919, again, we're standing on the very threshold of the Messianic kingdom, so that urgency is still there. Watchtower, February 1919. The work of harvesting is done. The dark night is rapidly coming on, and soon we'll be at home. So that urgency. October 1919, the end of the journey of the church is at hand within a short time. So again, all urgency. November 1919, Watchtower, Golden Age this time. Golden Age, November 12th, 1919. We submit that the evidence is conclusive to the reasonable mind who believes in the scriptures that the world has ended, the old order is passing away, and the new is coming in. Then we have a section of writings that have to do with the faithfulness of their preaching. And these are later in history, 1950s, give or take. So the remnant of the spiritual Israelites have been openly praising Yah or Jehovah since AD 1919, when they were released from Babylon's power. And that's, of course, Watchtower, December 15th, 1950. And again, same general theme. They've become alive and increasingly active in preaching. Watchtower, March 1st, 1951. In November 1951, the same. They've been released, and what responsibility? What must they undergo? They were committed to the great privilege and the heavy responsibility of carrying forward the clean, undefiled worship of the true God, Jehovah, and extending it to the ends of the earth. Watchtower, April 15th, 1952. Speaks about the Spirit having been poured out and the Jehovah's Witnesses having been sent forth to work. September 1953. In 1919, they were reinstated to divine favor, service, and worship. 1958. It's noted that since 1919, the faithful and discreet slave, who is a composite person made up of all anointed Christian joint heirs of Jesus Christ, has been taking care of all his belongings on earth. That's 1958. July 15th, 1960, notes the publications that have been being printed, and the fact that people need to keep up with the good food that is being supplied by the approved channel and then published by the Watchtower Society. You can't afford to miss a meal. The last section has to do with the Watchtower's appointment as God's channel. The first reference is from January 15th, 1966. Notes that God has only had one channel at a time and that we need to recognize that they are God's channel. 1973, Watchtower. 1973, it's actually God's Kingdom of 1,000 Years has approached, has an extensive, lengthy section on the faithful and discreet slave, and that is helpful in understanding what's going on in their minds. Watchtower, February 1st, 1975, discusses the faithful slave who has been appointed to be able to feed those who need spiritual nourishment and to take care of the organization. Watchtower, 1981. God has provided a visible organization as faithful and discreet slave made up of spirit-anointed ones to help Christians in all nations to understand and apply properly the Bible to their lives. It goes on to add, unless we're in touch with this channel of communication, we will not progress along the road to life. (1983's September Watchtower reinforces the fact that the false churches of Christendom were unable to supply adequate spiritual food, but the Jehovah's Witnesses were found to have that spiritual food and to be doling it out in abundance at the proper time. Watchtower, July 1st, 1989. During the earthly ministry, Jesus cleansed the temple. In 1918, he accompanied Jehovah to the spiritual temple to cleanse God's people. Watchtower, September 1st, 1989. Only Jehovah's Witnesses, those of the anointed remnant and the great crowd, as a united organization, have any scriptural hope of surviving the impending end of this doomed system dominated by Satan and the devil. 1994, anybody who wants to understand the Bible needs to go through the Jehovah's Witnesses because that is God's channel of communication. Watchtower, 2001. We can only listen to what God reveals in His Word and must reject teachings based on human wisdom or tradition. Organized to do God's will, 2005. Christ uses His body to publish information on the fulfillment of Bible prophecies and also gives spiritual food to the local congregations of Jehovah's Witnesses. Watchtower, April 1st, 2007. On arriving to inspect the slave in 1918, Christ found a spirit-anointed remnant of faithful disciples who since 1879 have been using this journal, the Watchtower, and other Bible-based publications to provide spiritual food at the proper time. He acknowledged them as his collective instrument or slave, and in 1919 entrusted them with the management of all his earthly belongings. Report of the annual meeting, 2012. The faithful and discreet slave was appointed over Jesus' domestics in 1919. That slave is a small composite group of anointed brothers serving at world headquarters during Christ's presence, who are directly involved in preparing and dispensing spiritual food. They act as the faithful and discreet slave.